Hello there, and welcome to another video of EDF 607, my reading response. And we're back for a second week in a row, because I feel like I did pretty well in the last video, so we'll see. And also I realized I am wearing the same exact shirt that I wore last week, so whether that's coincidence or not, I don't know. But we're going to be talking about the reading again this week. And so, really quickly, kind of the same exact format as last week. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of what the reading was about, and then go through each thought afterwards. And so the two main readings we had was Losing Heart by Shapiro, and then we also had Don't Believe Everything You Think. So instead of 3 readings from last week, we have 2 for this week. So this video might be a little bit shorter because there's not as much readings, but we're going to go through in depth. And also I took notes, so if you see me like looking down on the table, it's because I'm looking at my notes, and I won't try and subjugate you to try and read my chicken scratch handwriting. I already had to do that with my journal with writing cursive, so we're not going to have you do that. So anyway, basically the overarching theme of what I got from this week, and also something else to take note, is that I am a voodoo this week, so I'm also to play devil's advocate. However, this video may not be really being the devil's advocate. There are some things that I found that I would generally disagree with on some things that Shapiro and Kita say. Nothing huge or radical, just I have a few little things here and there that I found that I slightly disagreed with when it came to their reasoning. So anyway, the overarching theme for Shapiro's book, we're going to go through this first, is that it talks about how we are a very materialistic, consumerism-themed culture and society, where we weren't really much like that, but now we've slowly evolved into being a culture that is all about getting the best stuff, or getting the highest paid paycheck, getting the best education in means of achieving a higher status in society. And so that's what Shapiro was talking about. And so I'm going to do, like I said last week, very similar, but I'm also going to go through a couple of quotes that I found that were very eye-popping, and then once I go through a couple of them, I'll tell you how my interpretation of each quote was, and then I will kind of give you my afterthoughts of what I believe that Shapiro was trying to say, and whether I agree with them or not. So we're going to start is on page 21, and so it's actually in the near the very top of the page, and it says, "Students who are at best, when they are not entirely turned off to the whole business, trained to focus not on the intrinsic experience of learning itself, the joy, power, and transformative nature of ideas, but only on the payoff in the form of transcript, resume, and diploma." And so going on making connections with this week's reading and the last couple weeks' reading, that the perception of education now is that we really don't teach and we don't learn just for the sake of learning. We don't learn to be better people. We don't learn to be more well-rounded and more knowledgeable of the world. We do it in order to get a higher paycheck. We do it in order to get better grades, because grades will lead to a better college. A better college leads to a better post-grad program, and then that post-grad position leads to a better job opportunity, and then that leads to more money. And so it's talking about that's our basic motivation of why we go to school. And of course, I'll give my opinion on it at the very end of when I talk about this section. But I just want to kind of give you the basic, my interpretation of what Shapiro was trying to say with this. And also another note is, I know I'm kind of hopping around here, but Shapiro is split up into 2 chapters. There was chapter 2 and there was chapter 3. This is just chapter 2. Chapter 3 is on a slightly different subject, but overall, they're all linked together in that same broad category. So, going on to page 23, it is near the very top of the page, again, top right. It says, "Expressed ultimately in what became the juggernaut of standardized testing and the demand that learning means nothing if it cannot be covered into results that fit a uniform set of wrong and right answers." And this basically is saying that if it can't be measured, then it's not really worth going with. It's not worth measuring or even doing or attempting. If it can't be put on a test, can't be given a grade or something like that, then it's really not worth the effort to go through it. And And it's a hard thing with standardized testing nowadays because you have to find that happy medium between deciding, okay, when do we need to focus purely on what's going to be on a test or what's actually going to be, interesting, engaging, and growth creating, like just creating a more well-rounded student. And so you have to find that. And I think one thing is that I do believe there are some teachers who they come to class, they sit down, they just teach the test, and that's it. They just go home and that's all they do. However, some teachers that I have had have not taught like that. And it's been more, yes, we have to teach the key stuff about standardized testing, but also we're going to learn about this and this and this more interesting stuff that's going to be more useful later on down the road in life. More of the out-of-classroom lessons that we're taught. And so this is basically saying that our culture is all about results. It's all about getting out what you put into it. So, heading on, we are going to talk on page 25. It says, and like I said, page 25, whatever it is that our schools teach, the most powerful messages that shape the values and aspirations of our kids' lives are found in TV, movies, magazines, the internet, and in advertising, which relentlessly emphasize fame, success, and money. On this quote, I understand where Shapiro is going with this. We're talking about how we are so molded by advertising, what we see on TV and media. But I think it's a little bit too narrow of a viewpoint, saying that this is the main cause of why we're so consumerist. Yes, it's a factor, but I think the biggest influence is not what you see on the screen, it's what goes on outside of that. And I believe that honestly, whether it's your religious background, your personal upbringing, your circle of friends you associate with, that will have a bigger impact on you than say a TV commercial on TV. Now, of course, I can only speak for myself. I never really experienced the whole, oh, you saw this big toy truck on TV, I have to have it now. I was never really affected by it. And like I said, this is personally me. And I think that's one thing with Shapiro is that I understand what he's going through. He makes good points with this, but he's speaking, I think, too far generally, like saying everyone's like this. And I don't tend to agree with that when you speak in ultimatums like that. So where I think that, yes, there are advertising and internet and TV have a lot to do with how our culture is. I don't think it's the most important thing of how it affects. I think home life is, honestly, in my opinion, the number one reflector of how you're going to be as an adult. Because, of course, let's say, for example, let's just play a pretend game here, is that you have a kid who sees this advertisement on TV, and he's like, oh my gosh, I have to have that toy. Like, Mommy, Daddy, I gotta go get that toy, it's so great. It's at that point, it's the responsibility of the parent to say, well, I mean, that'd be nice, but we don't have the money for it, or you just got one. There's no need for you to have one. There's no need to have unnecessary stuff. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of families need to push onto their kids. And it goes beyond just buying stuff, like moral issues, teaching lessons, and we're all going to be affected by media at one point or another in our lives, some more than others. But I think it's also important for the family. I think it's very intrinsic for the home life to be very steady, because if your home life is steady, then that counteracts so much of that goes on outside of school. So that's my little talk about that. And also, and this kind of goes into, not really a quote I have, but on page 27 it talks about throwaway culture. And where it's talking about all we want is the new thing. We want the new toy, we want the brightest bit of jewelry, we want the prettiest shirt, we want the golf clubs that can drive 425 yards instead of 415 yards, all the stuff that where we just throw away stuff that is, whether it's the last mile. Now I will agree with this part. Is like, for example, the biggest example I have is the iPhone. Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they come out with an iPhone almost every year. And so, for example, I got the iPhone 6 about, back in March, something like that. And this was like the hot new phone. But now they're coming out with the iPhone 7 to where, some people are like, oh, I have the iPhone 6. This thing's useless to me now. So let's go and get the iPhone 7. And so I think that, now where he mentions that we're a throwaway culture, I do find that very true. Excuse me. And where we always look for that bright new object. Now I won't say it's a whole culture, but there are some people who are like that. So, anyway, that's the first chapter. That's chapter 2. Basically talking about how we're very consumerist. We're very much, we want to buy the newest thing. We're very absorbed by it. My basic thoughts is that are we a culture where we like to buy things and we like to have the newest object? I would say generally yes. But to say that we are an entire culture of that, I would have to disagree. The reason why is because you can't just throw everyone into one broad category. That's my firm belief. You can't throw everyone into one broad category and consider them, oh, everyone's like that. That's just my personal belief. You know, it could be a wrong way thing, but my thing is that never place anyone into a broad category where it's unjustly. So where you say like, oh, everyone's materialistic, everyone wants to go to school to get a better grade and go get a job. And like I said, I can only speak for myself, is that I go to school. Yes, it's going to lead me to a job. Yes, it'll help me make money. But the reason why I get a job, I'm going to school, mainly is to learn stuff, is to be a better person. Because I feel like school is, one thing that we forget in schools is that you discover who you are in society through school. Not just what you learn in class, but outside when you interact with people. And how you realize, who am I, what am I going to become, and how am I going to be a functional member of the human race? Where am I going to fit in? And so I think in school and in life in general, we ought to find that. I think school is a great way of discovering that. And so I believe that it's not let's say everyone goes to school just for a grade. Yes, people do that. But I wouldn't say that everyone's just like, only reason I'm in school. Like you have 30 kids in a classroom. You can't say all 30 of you are here just to get a grade. Some people might actually enjoy being in class. They might actually want to get a better grade. Wow, I just kind of contradict myself on that statement. What I mean is they want to be in there to get a better knowledge of the content. My tongue slipped there. But that's my thought. And one thing is that with getting a better job, getting a better paycheck, if money, and this is kind of a little bit of my voodoo stuff here coming out, if hypothetically, if all we're doing as a culture is to make money and be successful, then quite frankly, why are we learning to be teachers? I mean, we're going to be honest with this, because let me tell you this, teachers do not make a whole lot, and they do not make enough based on what they do not make enough. We're an average salary, I think, in Virginia is $36,000. That's barely being able to, like, to live on that amount of money. Especially if you have a family. That's really hard, especially if you have like a family to worry about. And so my thing is that teachers or people who go into maybe not necessarily high glamour jobs, so to speak, like lawyers, doctors, things like that, and where teachers go in and they just do it because they love the kids or they love the content that they're teaching. And so I think with teaching, you rarely, my mom always told me, he said, never go into teaching for the money, because there is none involved with it. And so I think that's at least one profession. I can think of a couple that are examples of how we're not completely driven just by making money. We are driven by making a difference in the world. So the next two parts we're talking about, just briefly tap on them, is going to be chapter 3 of Shapiro. And so we're going to go through here, same thing. Same basic concept. We're just going to go through, we're going to read a few quotes that I found that I liked, and then just go from there and give my thoughts and then move on. So, the first quote is on page 37, and basically the overall arching theme of this one is talking about human nature and how we react and why we react to certain things in certain ways. And so basically talking about how, well, somebody does something really bad, it's human nature, just it's who we are. That's kind of the basic overview of what this chapter is about. And so, here's one quote I saw. I point out that we often refer to human nature when we attempt to explain things that are socially undesirable. For example, we might say that women like to gossip, or that men are sexually irresponsible or aggressive, or that people never have enough money. The same explanation I offer is used to explain the existence of war, greed, selfishness, exploitation, the desire, I'm trying not to sneeze, to show we are better than another, being ethnically prejudiced, and so on. And so they bring the thoughts like, what Shapiro kind of says is that we use human nature kind of as a cop-out. So like, you do something bad, like, it's just human nature. I can't help who I am as an individual, as a person. It's part of who we are as human beings. And based on, like if I go out and hit somebody in the hallway, and it's like, oh, it's just human nature, it's just how we act. It's kind of an excuse not to take the full responsibility. It kind of takes away from saying like, well, that's just who I am. This is my nature. It's in my nature to be like that. And you hear that a lot of people, like people get angry all the time. Like, I'm sorry, I get angry all the time. It's just in my nature. They use that as an excuse to not take responsibility for their actions. So that's just one quote that they used. Going to page 49. It's King one. It's under normal versus abnormal humanity. And it says, in all of this, we need to remember that schools have always played an important role in passing ideas about who is normal, or at least who think and act in ways that are manipulated as proper to civilized human beings. Our textbooks still convey ideas about the savagery of Indians. Our history lessons emphasize the supposed superiority of all Western and European minds over the non-Western peoples, Christianity over other religions. And so, throughout history, there's always been a hierarchy of people, regardless of whatever culture you're in. For example, in World War II, you had the Jewish people being prosecuted by the Nazis in Germany. Also in that same period of time, you had Chinese, native Chinese, being discriminated against by Japanese. Of course, big one is civil rights movement in U.S. history. And so, as always in human nature, we always sometimes tend to move towards that sense of superiority. For example, with homelessness, we tend to think of people who are homeless, they're lazy, they don't work hard enough. We have a sense of superiority where, we try and say, oh, look at us, we're much better. I think that's one thing in classes. We kind of tend to have that sense of superiority. You have you have your honors classes here, you have your general ed here, and you have your, low achieving class down here. There's always hierarchies of different achievement in schools. And so I think that's personally a problem that we have. And now, of course, we need to have those advanced placements, but we shouldn't have, for example, if you're in elementary class, first grade, you don't have like the blue birds, red birds, white birds kind of thing, where it's just like it's distinctly separating people apart, especially at that age. Because especially I think at that age, you need people just be together, don't even worry about advanced placements. Just bring your class together and just not separate them based upon their academic achievement. So, then we head on is page 54. And this is kind of what I was going to be talking about with, poor people or homeless people. Here's a quote that kind of goes into talking about that. And it's on page 54. All right. The world of achievement ideology is one that is divided between the nobodies and the somebodies. Fear and anxiety hangs over all of us, that we not end up in the former category. It is easy to see how this way of thinking has so profoundly shaped Americans' attitude toward the poor. The poor not only suffer from a lack of money and resources, they also suffer a lack of respect. And so, going back into chapter 2, talking about how we're so driven to be successful, how we're so driven to make money, buy the house, have the 2.5 children, the white picket fence sort of dream. When we see people who are, for example, homeless, we tend to look down and like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, why aren't you working hard? And so I think that also links in with kind of the materialistic consumerism type of society that we live in, is where we tend to look down on people like that. We tend to value them not as much. Like I said, with that superiority, with that human nature saying that, there's always a natural pecking order with how things are done. So, then we are going to go to one last quote that I found in the book. And we're going to hop, skip, and jump over to Kita in just 1 second. So, on page 62. Okay, page 62 says, Nothing here is meant to deny the enormous fun and excitement that comes from participating in or watching sporting events or other forms of competitive entertainment. My argument here is not to somehow nullify competition, as if there were even possible. It is that we have allowed this particular form of human relationship to overwhelm and subsume other important ways in which we may relate to one another. We have created a world that is morally, spiritually, and emotionally out of balance. And so basically it's just talking about how Shapiro believes that competition, to a degree, can be a bad thing. And I would agree with this, because like I said, first week of class with competition, you have a lot of people who will cheat in order to get a better grade. And so sometimes competition is bad, because you do tend to cheat, you bend the rules, you do something you normally wouldn't do. However, I do believe competition is important because it does make you want to be better. Because I taught economics in 8th grade, and I talked to my students, and we were talking about competition between companies and businesses and all that stuff. And so I asked my athletes, said, is competition important? No, I didn't really ask my athletes, I asked all my students, is competition important? And a lot of kids raised their hand, and I said, all right, who plays a sport in here? And a kid raised their hand, and I said, all right, well, question. If you were playing in a district where, let's say you're playing basketball, and if everyone else in your district is really, 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 really bad, would you practice as hard? And most kids would say, no, I wouldn't practice hard, because, there's no real competition. There's no need to go out and do better, practice real hard, because we're going to just wipe the floor with everybody. Then I said, all right, second scenario, what if you play in a very strong division where everyone is just really good? Would you practice more or less? And most people would say, we need to practice more. And see, there's extra benefits to practicing harder. Yes, it does prepare you for a game better, but it also makes you a better basketball player. For example, with job internships, you might have 1 or 2 positions open, and you have 3 or 4 candidates. Those 3 or 4 candidates, it'll make you better. You'll work hard. You may not get the job, but it'll teach you work ethic. It'll teach you to go that extra mile in order to get a job or get something that you truly want. Not necessarily even really linked with money. It could be anything that you have a desire for. If you put in that work, that competition is present there, in a sense it kind of puts the fire underneath your seat to where it says, you need to work harder. And so I do think competition is important. So that is Shapiro. So now we're going to go over to, real quick, is Don't Believe Everything You Think by Keto. And so I had a couple of quotes here. I had 3 that I thought were really good. And so the basic theme of this chapter is talking about science and about how it's basically talking about the scientific method and how we prove things by looking at the scientific method and how we prove stuff to be true. And so just one quote that I found is on page 74, and it's under How Science Progresses. Science uses theories in its attempt to better understand our world. Many people believe that a scientific theory is nothing more than a guess or a hunch, but for a scientist, established theories are far more than simple intuition. Visible theories have considerable data in support of their predictions. This distinction between the public's perception of the term and its scientific meaning has led to a lot of misunderstanding. So, talking about how important the scientific method is to proving something's right. So, for example, if you think there's an issue wrong with school, let's say, well, I believe that we are giving away too many free lunches, then let's have a study to see, okay, is that true? How can we put it into a theory, work it out, see if it's proven, and then find a solution to it, if that turns out to be a problem. And so it's just talking about how a lot of times we get mixed up with this, and where we think we know a term, but in the scientific world, it might mean something completely different. So we're going to go to page 78 for the next quote. Okay, and it's near the very bottom of the page, page 78. Some people claim that we can't trust the findings of science because scientists keep changing their minds. First, we're told eggs are bad. Too much cholesterol, then we hear eggs are good. They're an important source of protein. Well, what's the theory? Are eggs good or bad? Why can't scientists make up their mind? This view, however, demonstrates a basic misunderstanding of how science operates. As we've seen, science is a cumulative process, and the results of a single study tells us very little. We shouldn't form strong beliefs on the basis of one or even a small number of studies. So it's talking about not only you go through your scientific process, but also comparing your work with everyone else's. And in the book, it talks about how if you come up with a theory and think, okay, this is what I believe is true, then it'll be peer reviewed. It'll go through the process like, is it true? Is it something that can be proven? If it can be proven by other people, then it's considered to be a truth or fact. And so it just keeps going over and over again. So talking about even if it's one theory or even it's a number of people, you still need to have it reviewed and reviewed and reviewed over and over again. And I agree with that because you need to constantly gauge and see, all right, is this still relevant? Is this still a truth in science? So the last quote, and this one I would have to disagree with. Again, my voodoo is coming out in me on this, is on page 83, and it's the last paragraph of the entire chapter. It says, finally, we have to proportion our belief to the amount of evidence for or against that belief. If the evidence doesn't strongly support a belief, a leap of faith will never establish the belief as true. We simply can't make something true just by believing it. Consequently, we have to withhold judgment on certain issues until the preponderance of the evidence indicates that it's more prudent to accept one belief over the alternative. If we follow these basic guidelines used in science, we can all form more reasonable beliefs and make better decisions. And like I said, I understand where Keith is going with this quote, but I would have to disagree to a degree. Is that the basic quick summary of that is saying that if it cannot be scientifically proven, if it cannot be placed in this A, B, C, and D slot of the scientific method, then it's not truth. It's not fact. And where I can see why they would say that, I'd have to disagree to a little bit. The reason why is because not everything you have can be measured. In fact, actually, Shapiro and Keating contradict themselves because it talks about, let me get my notes here real quick, back on page 23, I believe. It says, expressed ultimately in what became the juggernaut of standardized testing and the demand that learning means nothing if it cannot be converted into results that fit the uniform set of wrong and right answers. So basically what here is saying that the problem with school system is that we always, if it can't be measured, then it's not worth learning. And I believe when you get into talking about what Keita says, you start to get into the aspect of faith and believing something, even if it hasn't been scientifically proven yet. And where I say, I do believe that we do need to have that process where we try and prove things. There are things you can't measure by a scientific method. Like, for example, like a gut feeling. Like you feel like you're in a situation that's just not quite right. You can't measure that. You can't measure someone's work ethic. You can't measure someone's compassion. That's something you just cannot put into a process and just make it pure science. I mean, it's scientific, but you can't put it into a process like that, in my opinion. I mean, of course, me saying this is all my opinion. But I believe that there's some things that are outside the scientific method that are true. My personal beliefs. That's just my thing. But overall, I did like what he was talking about with the scientific method. I'm a person who's very much proving it by fact and practice. Very much saying, let's prove and see this is right. I'm very much like wait and see if it is proven. So overall, both these books are really good. I think it was just talking about how we're a consumerist society overall, even though I don't think we should be labeling ourselves entirely as that. We do have consumeristic and materialistic aspects, but we're not a universal culture like that, in my opinion. And also talking about the scientific method, about testing things, about seeing whether they hold truth or not. So anyway, this has been my video, and oh my gosh, this video's gone longer than last week's. I ramble on a lot, I am sorry, but I will see you in class later on, and I hope you enjoy this video. I'll talk to you later.